Good morning. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the places at Hawk Blogger. And if you haven't already, make sure you find us on all the podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you like to get your audio pleasure. Give us a 5-star review. We'd love to have you. So it's a Saturday morning. I'm about to head over to Pittsburgh and watch the Seahawks play the Pittsburgh Steelers. But before we do that, there's a serious priority we got to take care of, which is our weekly conversation with my pal, Jeff Simmons. Man, how are you doing, dude?
I'm good. I'm a little cautious about the game this week. I'm curious to talk to you about it. But, yeah, a lot of the vibes have obviously changed a bit. I'm still a little bitter that the Seahawks cost us what could have been one of the greatest weeks to be a fan. Had the Seahawks just won that game and what's gone on in San Francisco, the amount of trolling and fun we could have had, I'm still a little bitter about that. Yeah. And so I'm trying to get built up for this week, but like a certain reporter from the Niners was talking about how healthy they were, and then had they lost and Purdy got injured and Kittle got injured and McCaffrey's banged up. Oh my God. I feel like Trent Williams had one of the worst games he's had since he's probably the worst game.
He might not play.
Really? I didn't see that.
Yeah, he hasn't practiced all week. He's questionable.
And so I'm still kind of recovering from what should have been. If the Seahawks just defense shut them down and then that happened, I just feel like the vibes would have been so good right now, and like this game would have felt a lot less meaningful and stressful. And now it's just like the whole thing is just flipped. Unfortunately, I know you rewatched the game. I rewatched the game. It felt different on the rewatch, and I'm glad you came to kind of the same conclusions as I did. But I just still feel that bitterness. I haven't recovered from that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that they'll recover from it the whole year. Like, we'll find out. Like, I'm not saying that the season's lost, but you could be to the end of the season, last month of the season, looking back at that week 1 home loss, divisional home loss, and being like, man, they really should have got that game. So, it's in the past. We're not going to focus on that. We got Steelers coming up tomorrow, and we got some news to talk about, Jeff. We got the injury report, and it was a little bit dicey all week. So Devon Witherspoon hadn't practiced, and then Julian Love hadn't practiced, and then Jaron Reed did not practice on Thursday. I was like, what's going on here? And it ends up with everybody's going to play except for possibly Devon Witherspoon. We knew Nick Emmanwori wasn't going to play, but there's even some news positively on the Nick Emmanwori front. So let's talk about the Devon Witherspoon thing in a second. Before we get to that, just for folks that don't quite follow, I saw some people not understanding the Nick Emmanwori news and why it was positive. So let's just clear that up real quick. So Nick Emmanwori had initially not a high ankle sprain, and then it was a high ankle sprain, and they were going to put him on IR Wednesday. Then it was like, no, we're going to take a little bit more time. And ultimately, they've decided to not put him on IR. And technically, they still could, but it would be odd for them to do it because now he is going to be he's going to be on the roster for this game. If they thought he was going to be longer than 4 weeks, they would have put him on IR for this game. It doesn't really make sense to do it after this game unless for some reason it gets worse. So the good news of this is it seems like Nick Emmanwori has a chance to be back in the next few games as opposed to, 4 weeks from now. So I just want to clarify for people that weren't clear on that.
Yeah, and I was a little surprised because I thought like even the little glimpses we saw of Emmanwori in the preseason, I just thought they'd kind of ease him in and bring him along slowly. And I heard Mike Sando talking about it on your show yesterday. I've heard you guys who are down every day, and it seemed like he was going to be a huge part of that opening game plan.
Yeah.
And the ability to play big nickel, and maybe that was a Shanahan-dependent kind of beater. And we really just saw one series where he had some good run fits, and then we never really got to see him. And Witherspoon had to kick inside, and he seemed to tick off. And obviously he's not playing this week, but they don't really have a guy who can replace the big nickel. And we saw what happened when Ty Okada went into the game. Kittle was just burning them. And so they didn't really have like a backup plan to that. And it seems like that's going to be a huge part of how they can win on third down, how they can win defensively. And if he's not out the 4 weeks, and you said he's not like in a boot or he's kind of limping around, if it's less than 4 weeks, the sooner they can get him back on the field, I think for development, it's really important that he can play and he can get up to the speed of the game. And so if he's only out 2 to 3 weeks, I think that's a pretty good sign.
Yeah, I think it's a very good sign. And it is interesting kind of like Mike Sando doesn't say things without evidence. And so I know he talks to folks all over the NFL and behind the scenes. And the way he said that, I got the same takeaway, Jeff. It was like, this was not we just lost a rookie, we'll roll with it. This was a pretty big hit for at least the way the Seahawks plan to use Nick Emmanwori. So that's all interesting. We're going to have to wait a little bit longer to see what that looks like. But we did get that Devon Witherspoon is doubtful for this game. He is on the plane here. He did fly to Pittsburgh. He's there with them. There's a chance, game time decision, he could go, but they've got him at doubtful. Assuming he doesn't go, one of the questions is like, okay, so what does that mean for this team? And I'm curious if you've thought through this a little bit, because I've got a couple thoughts, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, it really puts the Riq Woolen, I keep calling him Tariq. It's Riq Woolen. It really puts that conversation on hold because now he has to play, and now he's badly needed in this game. But the real question is, what are they doing with that nickel spot? Emmanwori was the number 1 option, and Witherspoon was the number 2 option. And then you look at Josh Jobe profiles more of an outside corner, and Shaq Griffin, same thing. And if they start moving DK Metcalf into the slots to get him some looks, who's going to cover him? And that's the real question. I think the silver lining-ish is that the Steelers, if you're going to look at some of their weaknesses, they're not great at receiver. I know Calvin Austin looked pretty good, but they were trying to sniff around Gabe Davis. And one of the flaws of their team building is they don't really have a second receiver or a third receiver even. Robert Woods didn't make the team. He's on the practice squad. I think he's getting released. Roman Wilson started a little slow. So it might not be the worst against certain teams. Like, we're playing the Lions and you've got to go up against St. Brown. It's pretty devastating. And maybe you have Woolen travel with DK Metcalf. Maybe that's how you do it. So I think matchup-wise, it's okay. But that nickel situation now becomes really interesting because already we don't know what's going on with Tyrice Knight. He seems a little step slow, and Drake Thomas might play. And I heard Griff's analysis on your show this week, so a little cautious there. But that nickel defense, and I think it's going to be important to beat Aaron Rodgers. I just don't know what we're in for tomorrow. And it could be Josh Jobe, Griffin, and Woolen, which is meh. But
well, let's talk about that because there was an interesting, I think, little tidbit that I'm guessing slipped by most people yesterday in Mike Macdonald's press conference. Yeah. He was asked about Shaq Griffin. And we've talked about the fact that it seems pretty obvious Shaq Griffin, Josh Jobe, and Woolen would be their top 3 corners, but none of them seemingly have nickel, slot experience. Well, Mike Macdonald said Shaq Griffin's played well, and he'd be the next guy in with Nehemiah Pritchett if something else happened. Well, that implies he's not in, which means he's not part of I think part of the starting 3 if they're in a nickel situation. So now we're like, okay, so who is? My best guess is it's Darian Kendrick. That's my best guess. I'm not reporting that. We don't get to watch practice. I can't tell you where the guys have been playing, but that's my best guess. And to make things more clear, you had said, Nick was the first nickel, Spoon was the second. In some ways, that's true. I think they were going to predominantly play big nickel, but they are 2 different defenses. Spoon would be matched up in nickel and against certain offenses, Nick and against others, and different personnel groupings. So I don't know that they have a big nickel replacement. I think maybe DeAnthony Bell might, or they just don't play it very much. And then the Devon Witherspoon nickel, I think it's going to be Darian Kendrick, but I honestly don't know. None of the other reporters knew either. Everyone was guessing. And I think that that's pretty crazy. This is why I thought Demarion Williams had a chance to make the team early, because he was the only nickel guy they had other than Spoon. So yeah, I'm very, very curious to see what that looks like.
Yeah, and the thing with me and I think most Seahawks fans is we don't know a lot about Kendrick. And we've seen a little bit with the Rams, but we didn't really get to see him in the preseason. He was added after the cutdown day. And we don't really know how much he's played in the slot versus outside. And it's a total guesswork, and they haven't had him for that long. They've only had him for 2 weeks. So obviously the pro scouts would have a pretty good read on him. And they obviously liked him. They initially cut Griffin to bring him onto the roster. But yeah, that's a good point. I didn't quite catch that in the I did watch the press conference last night just so I'd be prepared for the show. But again, I think matchup wise, this is okay. But if he's not up to speed, or he's a step slow, or he's a big weakness, Rodgers is going to go after that guy. And Rodgers is very cerebral with how he attacks defenses, and he knows exactly who he's going after. And there was that whole time where he just wouldn't throw at Sherman. It was 10 years ago. But
yeah,
I think that becomes a big question of how they went on third down.
Well, so that's the other side. And you hit on this as well in terms of, okay, well, is this a team in Pittsburgh that is going to be, exploiting that nickel weakness that the Seahawks might have? We don't know. Maybe Kendrick plays great. Who knows? But out of 32 teams, where would you think the Steelers ranked in terms of percentage of 11 personnel, meaning 1 running back, 1 tight end, and 3 receivers, which would be the typical personnel grouping that you'd use to get the nickel back out there?
I'm going to say like 31.
Close. 32.
Okay, that was because they're a very Arthur Smith historically is a big tight end guy, and they traded for Jonnu Smith, who's his favorite player, and they have Freiermuth, and they have our buddy Darnell Washington. They're at 2, 3, 21 personnel, 12 personnel. And again, based on how their roster was built, I don't even know what their third receiver would be. I think it's probably Roman Wilson.
It is Roman Wilson. Yeah.
Who didn't get a lot of Calvin Austin had a nice game in the opener, but they're a heavy personnel, which I think plays into the Seahawks. Like, I think that helps. So again, if they were playing like the Rams or another team that can go heavy 11, it would be very worrisome. And that's where I said before, the matchup is okay, but they might not need to use nickel as much.
Yeah. I think it's more going to be a question of, okay, how do you feel like Jobe and Woolen are going to hold up against Metcalf and Austin on the outside? Because those are the top 2 targeted players last week for the Jets. The third, tied for second, was Jonnu Smith, the tight end. And then after that, Kenneth Gainwell running back, then Pat Freiermuth. So yeah, tight ends. If you add up the tight end targets, you're talking about, the second most on that team. So I do think that it would be a perfect big nickel situation. So Nick Emmanwori not being there is unfortunate for a lot of reasons. Maybe this means DeAnthony Bell gets more playing time. Maybe this means the Seahawks play more base, and we're going to see both Tyrice Knight and Drake Thomas get more reps. I don't know. They're a 3-4 team. The Seahawks are. So, I'm just kind of curious. Usually it would be an extra safety in there. I don't know. I'm really, really curious. I don't have the answer. Usually I would have a pretty good guess. I'm just not sure what they're going to do.
Anthony Bell's not even on the roster. He's on the practice squad. So
today would be the day. They'd have to.
I'm expecting he gets bumped up for the Saturday.
Yeah.
We'll see today at 1 p.m. Pacific time who they bump up. But I would expect his name to be on there.
So that's the Seahawks side of it. The Steelers side of it. Early in the week, Mike Tomlin was like, yeah, Joey Porter Jr., the cornerback, he's going to play. We're optimistic. And then didn't practice, and he's out. And what do you think that means for this matchup? They have now Jalen Ramsey and Darius Slay. And then I think the name of the third guy is what's his name? Got it somewhere on the tip of my tongue. Brendan Eccles. Eccles is the third guy. He'll be the slot.
Well, I think it's like the exact same situation on the opposite side where they're probably like, crap, we really like having Porter as an outside corner. We don't really have anyone that can do what he does. Similar, but if they're thinking, okay, of all 32 teams, who's the one you might want to go against in that situation? It's probably the team that doesn't really have the outside corner or the big receiver that can push that matchup. So I'm guessing Ramsey's going to spend a lot of time on JSN because Slay looks like a guy they can take. Because you looked at the Jets, for example. When I looked at that team, I thought MVS was a trade candidate there because they have one receiver essentially. and it's a worse version of what the Seahawks have. It's Josh Reynolds is their second receiver. And say we want about Cooper Kupp or Horton, but I think we'd all take those guys over Josh Reynolds. So they're probably thinking, okay, this isn't the end of the world. We just need to cover JSN. I don't know who's going to get us deep on the outside. And Cooper Kupp didn't have a great opener. I think Tory Horton, this could be a good game for him. And I think this is a game where he can get down the field. If they can hold up in pass pro, I think this is a game where we can see some Tory Horton. I think they're going to have to take some shots down the field. I think I've heard that from Kubiak, and I've heard that from Macdonald. And Slay looked like a guy they can go after, and he has to be on the field now the whole game. So the outside corners have a big assignment. All these guys can be burned. JSN got down the field in the key moment of the game. They're probably thinking, okay, it's the Seahawks. They don't have deep speed. This is fine. But I think this is really where we're going to need to see Horton. I don't know if Bobo's that guy who's going to keep these guys over the top. I don't know if Riq Young is going to be doing that. I think Horton's got a key if you want to get the offense to stretch the field.
Yeah. I think you're onto something there, Jeff. And I talked to Nick Farabaugh from Penn Live, who covers the Steelers, and this is before the season even started, and he was like, I'm a little concerned that the Steelers corners aren't fast and that they're going to be challenged by speed.
Yes.
And he kind of reiterated that when we talked this week, and I'm sitting there looking at our, the Seahawks receiving room, and I'm kind of like, well, who do we have that really is going to challenge them that way? And here's the thing. I'm really interested to see how JSN does against Ramsey, because I like that matchup. I like the JSN against anybody. Like, yeah. I at this point, I want to see JSN against anybody. And then Darius Slay, he looked a little cooked, honestly. And so it doesn't have to be like, if Cooper Kupp's going to have a matchup where he's better off, maybe it's him versus Brandon Eccles or him versus Darius Slay. But I think you're right. I think it's going to be Darius Slay against Tory Horton quite a bit. I like that matchup. I am not backing down from Tory Horton being a good rookie receiver. He wasn't even targeted in week 1. Let's see. Like, this is a great opportunity for him, and I think he's going to be a key aspect of this offense. I also, Jeff, I'm curious where the tight ends are going to show up in this game.
Yeah, and they need to design a lot more for their tight ends. I thought AJ Barner looked pretty good last year when he got chances, and they didn't really give him much other than a pass like a couple yards within the line of scrimmage. And again, that's where the whole under center play action thing really stood out to me, because I think when you can make the runs, marry up with the passes, and I think that really plays into the tight ends, especially if they're trying to get the ball out of Darnold's hand quicker. And so Mike Macdonald's going to know Patrick Queen and how to attack him better than anyone. He's going to know. I thought the fact that they didn't try to sign him was pretty telling. But they're going to know how to attack those guys, and that's where the tight ends, I don't think the Steelers are great covering at the linebacker level. And like Mason Taylor had a couple catches last week, and he had a quiet first game overall. But I think Arroyo, if they're going to need to see some speed, they're going to need to have some targets for him. They threw like one pass to him last game, and they really didn't design any plays for him, it seemed like. I think they're going to need to use Barner and Arroyo for this offense to work in general. And I think if you're looking at where they can have matchup advantages, again, I think Macdonald is going to know exactly how do you attack Patrick Queen and what his limitations are. And he's a great guy in coming downhill in some areas, but they need a lot more from the tight ends. And that was an area I personally was very excited about on this roster. And they were barely used. And I don't know if that means they're not good or I overrated them, but I don't know, because they didn't really give them a chance. Yeah. And I found that very concerning from Kubiak's side. And I think this is a matchup where, again, we look at this offense, wide receiver is a question mark. Tight end needs to be an important part of this passing game for it to work. And you've seen all the Kubiak offenses or the Shanahan offenses, they do really use tight ends because of the mismatches they can create. And they have guys who can create mismatches. Both Barner and Arroyo, in my opinion, should be able to. You've seen it with Kittle and even Owen Daniels back in the day. Like, Owen Daniels wasn't a super athlete. He just knew how to run routes. And I think they have the guys to do that. They spent a very high pick on Arroyo. He needs to be an important part of this passing game every week.
Yeah, I think it is one of my favorite parts of this part of the year is that every week for the first few weeks, you're really kind of opening up a surprise. You don't know what's going to be there. You don't have enough information, and you're going against different teams with different things, and you might get different results. And we don't know. Like the Seahawks coaching staff likely is making adjustments, this week as well. But I'm curious. A couple things come to mind for me, Jeff, that are of interest. One, did you see the captains for this week?
I did.
Did anything jump out to you, or anything like catch your eye?
Just seemed like a bunch of meat and potato players.
Zach Charbonnet as a captain. Do you think am I reading too much into that? That he might be featured more heavily in this game?
I had the same thought. And I noticed it was the meat and potato guys. That means run the ball heavily. And at first, I'm like, is Charbonnet from Pittsburgh? Like, does he have connections to the coaching staff? And I don't believe that it's the case. So, look, I came off the post-game show last week, and my first take was Charbonnet needs to be the RB1. And no disrespect to Ken Walker, he just looks, every time I've seen him in the offense versus even the preseason, he just looks more competent right now and more consistent. And I think for this whole offense to work, they need the kind of running he's bringing. They can't have negative plays. They can't be getting pushed back. And again, Walker ran into some tough situations against heavy boxes. But yeah, I think there's the case right now, and Brady's been alluding to it all summer, that he should be the guy, and the coaches like him more than maybe people are expecting. I know like the fantasy community were huge on Walker. I think it's pretty telling that they made him a captain. And again, for this offense to work this week, I think they're going to need to run the ball because they have a very good pass rush on the other side. The Jets just ran all over them and so if they become one-dimensional, I don't think that's a great look for the Seahawks with the way they can rush the passer and where we're limited. So yeah, I think it's pretty telling that he, of all people, especially with all the stories of the coaches being very high on him, and he's a great leader and professional, I think he's going to get more snaps than Walker tomorrow.
Yeah, and I mean, I thought Ken Walker was going to be the starter last week, and he was.
Yeah.
I think Zach Charbonnet is going to be the starter this week. I expect when they come out for their first series, I think Charbonnet is going to be the guy with that offense. And, I don't have a horse in this race. I'm not Evan or someone who's been super on one side or super on the other. I think they both have a lot of value and a lot of talent. I'm not super down on Ken Walker, and I understand why people are. People were super down on Zach Charbonnet last year, and I
was one of them.
I like generally I see they both have different strengths, but if you watch Seattle Overload with Griff and Maddie and that stuff, and I only caught a little bit, but they were going through and they found the same thing I found, which is they were running Ken Walker on a lot of gap scheme stuff, and the line is not really built for gap scheme blocking, and so they were getting blown off the ball. And in particular, Jalen Sundell struggles in those kind of man up, power blocking schemes. And Ken Walker was the recipient of like poor blocking. Now, it doesn't excuse him for everything. I'm not saying, it's all that, but I don't think that last week's game was the referendum on Ken Walker that maybe some people thought it was. But at the same time, if they feel like Zach Charbonnet is the better back in zone scheme, and they're going to be a zone scheme team, then I think it makes sense that we're going to start seeing more of Zach Charbonnet in that situation. So yeah. We'll see. I think that's a big one. The other thing I wanted to bring up, Jeff, this is silly. Like I should have thought about this and I didn't. What are the defense? The Seahawks, they're a 3-4 defense. Yes.
Yeah.
What has the Seahawks offense been practicing against all training camp?
The 3-4 fronts.
What did this 49ers play?
4-3.
4-3. Yeah. And then what did the Steelers play?
3-4.
3-4. So the reason this comes up for me is I was listening to Jalen Sundell talk about, the blocking scheme and how things change from one week to another. And this is just in the locker room. And he's like, the 49ers and Steelers are like just completely different. And going from 4-3 to 3-4, everything changes. Is it possible, or is it just cope, that part of the reason the Seahawks struggled with their blocking and targeting in that first game is they just haven't played many 4-3 looks up until that game.
I think that's part of it. And I think you made the great take on our post-game show that I didn't realize at all until I watched the film and I heard Maddie and Griff talk about it. I think Robert Saleh did an awesome job mixing up their fronts. And Maddie and Griff are always talking about like the lineage of defenses. And they actually said Saleh was doing stuff that wasn't just the Pete Carroll fronts. It was Macdonald fronts and different looks. And I just think the Seahawks weren't prepared for those looks. And it seemed like all week they weren't targeting. And there was clips of just looking at their run blocking, and they were outnumbered on every one of those plays. And Fred Warner and D. Winters had excellent games. And that was something we just thought if they ran against weak defensive tackles, you'd be able to run. But now you saw the Jets run all over these guys last week, and they're in a similar spot. They're practicing against similar heavy personnel groups. And so the Seattle should be a lot more prepared. If they're going to lose this matchup, I don't think it's going to be of looks and fronts they're not prepared for. It's going to be them just losing assignments or being overpowered. And we're going to see. Like Sundell is going to be going against different kinds of players this week. They don't have the run blocking linebackers. I mean, the run stopping linebackers that we saw in San Francisco. Those guys are probably two of the best in the league that we saw last week. And they should be way more prepared to block what Pittsburgh's going to do up front. Now it's a matter of doing it. Like Cam Hayward, when he's on, is one of the best defensive linemen in the league. They're not great at nose tackle. They're going to give a rookie, Yaya Black, a guy you spent a lot of time on the draft. He's going to get a lot more run this week. And obviously you got to block TJ Watt on the right side. So different kinds of, you dealt with Bosa last week, but if Hayward's a step slow like he was last week and they're familiar with the looks, they should be able to run the ball a lot more successfully. And again, for this whole thing to work, and you've been saying it since May or June, they need to be able to run the ball. They have a clear personnel disadvantage in the passing game. And I think for the whole thing to work, the whole thing to marry, and to really set the tone of what can have sustainable offense with the time of possession issues, they need to be able to run the ball. And so, yeah, you're right. I think knowing the fronts they're going up against, knowing how to attack them, Terrell Austin admitted that they didn't play the run at all well last week, and they had issues kind of on the same way the Seahawks had issues blocking it. And so that is a huge – I've talked to my buddy who's a Steelers fan. We're kind of going back and forth. And I said it all comes down to really how Broderick Jones blocks on one side and how you guys can stop the run or not. Because if they can tee off on Darnold with our receiver limitation, it becomes a tough game to win.
All right, let's play a little game.
Yeah.
All right. You can only have one. That's the game. And the point of this game is you can only pick one thing, and you have to decide which one would leave you from this game more optimistic. You feel better about. All right. First one, Seahawks rush for 150 plus yards, or Sam Darnold throws for 300 plus yards, 3+ touchdowns, and forget, like, assume 3 touchdowns rushing, but whatever. Right. And you get, let's just leave it at that. Either you have a really positive passing game or you have a really positive rushing game. Which one do you pick?
I'm going to say rush for 150. And I think that's relative to this team, how they need to win, the identity they need to build, how everything needs to tie together. I think it's like you said in June or whatever, they need to be a good running team. And you saw it in that second drive last week when they can run the ball, or the second last drive of the game, when they can run the ball, they look like a totally different offense. When you can play this defense with less time on the field, look, obviously in a general sense, passing games and a great quarterback play is the most sustainable predictor of any success right now in the NFL. I know you mentioned it yesterday. Like John Clayton used to say, whoever has the better quarterback is who you're going to win. And obviously if Darnold plays great, that's probably best for the long-term outlook of his team. So it's a really tough question, but I'm still going to say for Mike Macdonald and the Kubiak and this whole thing to work, I think them running for 150 against what we thought was a really tough matchup against a really good defensive line, I think that would get me, like we saw in the preseason when they were gouging guys. I think it opens up and it plays into their offense really well. And if they pass really well and then they can't run the ball next week, I don't know if I feel great about that. So I'm going to say, and it's a tougher answer than you thought, because again, if Darnold is good, that changes a lot of their prospects. And I think he played better than a lot of people credit him for last week. But I'm still going run, man. I'm tired of just watching a Seahawks team that can't run the ball. Yeah. What fired all of us up in the preseason was what they looked dominant running the ball. And Obviously, we didn't see anything close to that last week.
Yeah.
I want to see that, man. I want to see it.
It is a tough question because, to your point, I think to me, it's a bigger question mark whether this team is going to be able to eventually be a productive passing team than a productive running team. I am still very confident at some point in this season, they're going to figure out the run game and they're going to be a good run team. I'm pretty confident about that. I don't have the same confidence in the pass game. So if you go up there and you light it up, that would be also a really good sign. So either one, I'm sure we'd be happy about. But I think I lean towards the rushing with you, but it's tough. All right, next one. You can only have one.
Yeah.
Elijah Arroyo has a big game, or Tory Horton has a big game.
Ooh. I love Elijah Arroyo, but I'm going to say Tory Horton. Watching Cooper Kupp last week obviously left me with a lot of concerns. He just looked like there was no juice left in the tank, and he dropped the pass and he was short. I love Arroyo. I was excited about him in the preseason, but I think the biggest limitation on the Seahawks offense is deep speed. It's a receiver talent, and like everyone was left wondering about whether they should have done the Metcalf trade or not last week. I'm sure everyone was left. I think Arroyo, I think Horton, if he can open up the deep passing game, what that can do for JSN, what that can later do for the tight ends to stretch the field, I think that has a bigger impact than if Arroyo has a really good game. I think Horton, being that second wide receiver, which is going to change how people defend them. Again, I'd be thrilled if Arroyo is the one having a great game because they need that second weapon. And the second weapon can be a tight end. Like for years, teams have had one good receiver, one good tight end. But I'm going to say Horton. He's a guy I was bullish about in the draft. I think for this whole thing to work, being able to stretch the field is why they liked MVS as a kind of a filler option this year. I think they need someone with that deep speed to stretch the field.
Yeah, I think I go Arroyo on this one. It's close. It's close, but the productive tight end is just a rare breed. It's harder to find productive pass catching tight ends. So I think I lean towards Arroyo, and
yeah,
I think it also morphs what defenses have to account for in a different way than just I think most defenses are able to account for additional wide receivers. Not as many are well equipped to defend a quality tight end. So I mean, this is a fun one. Obviously, we take either.
Someone just said in the chat. Big Mike said that. I agree with that. Just give me.
That's not the game, Big Mike. You don't get to do that. All right, next one. You can only have one, Jeff. Byron Murphy has a big game, or either of the edge rushers, Derek Hallboy and Mafe, have a big game.
Oh, Byron Murphy by far.
Okay, by far.
Byron Murphy by far.
Yeah.
I just think the ceiling on Murphy is so much higher than those other two guys. And again, Mafe and Hall looked good last week. They did. But again, I'm going to bring this back to the bigger picture conversation about the Seahawks. And I know you're thinking the same thing as me. You can't help not watch the Packers right now with Micah Parsons and just feel that jealousy of just what a great player and what a blue chip player does for a team. And they were compared to the Seahawks by Albert Breer roster-wise, and they were a good defense last year, but not a great defense. And you drop Parsons in there, and obviously Byron Murphy's not Micah Parsons. In no scenario it is. But again, just watching the Seahawks last week, and I thought Daniel Jeremiah had a great way of describing the game. He said the Seahawks had the better roster, more quality players, but they don't have the dudes at the end of the game. And so, again, this puts a lot of stress on Byron Murphy. But I think he is the guy I think could really, if he can flash, I think it just has a huge impact. Because Leonard Williams is playing great. But I think the Seahawks need someone to emerge as a great player. And again, I'd be thrilled if it's Hall or Mafe. But the Seahawks are still left with that question. Who are the dudes? Mm-hmm. And if it's Murphy and we saw it in the first half a little last week. You saw glimpses of it. He's not disrupting enough still. And I don't even know what his ceiling is at this point. We still need this thing to play out. But again, I think his ceiling is just much different level than Hall and Mafe's.
Yeah, this one's a harder one for me than you'd think. Normally it'd be an easy like Byron Murphy, and I certainly wouldn't be sad, but I think I lean towards edge. I would love to see. I think Derek Hall and Boye Mafe both had better games than I realized on first watch, and they've got advantageous matchups this week. Like
Sounds good.
I think that they can get after these guys, and they have a quarterback in Aaron Rodgers that's not going to be able to run away from them. So if not now, when? I guess I would say on the edge. I think the Steelers have some better, like their center's a good center. The interior blocking might be a little bit ahead. The edge, Fautana is a decent right tackle for sure, but Broderick Jones is not. If they come out of this with a goose egg again, I think that would be a bigger issue than if Byron Murphy came out of this game with, a goose egg. So I think I lean towards the edge.
It's a good point, but imagine pressure right in Rodgers' face, what he can do with that. And I think the biggest way the Seahawks can win this game defensively is when you watched Rodgers last week and guys got around him, he wasn't very mobile and he didn't look like he wanted to get hit. And it's the complete opposite, because if the Seahawks played against a version of that last week, the way they got pressure on Purdy, they would have had a crazy amount of sacks, I think. And we have to see if they can get that kind of rush again going on the road. Different Aaron Rodgers at the line of scrimmage, his snap counts and things like that are very different. But if they can get pressure on Rodgers and get right by him, I think it's going to look very different than even the play at the end of the game where Purdy just completely shuffles out right. I don't think Rodgers has that anymore. And even at the end of the Jets game, he got away from them last year a couple times, but once they started getting near him in the second half, he was just tossing the ball up, and there was just dead plays on arrival.
100%. So a couple more. You can only have one. Riq Woolen has a big game, or Josh Jobe has a big game.
I'm going to say Josh Jobe. And look, if Riq has a great game, I think that's a great sign of just coaching, the development of the team, the whole energy. But I just can't help but listen to Aiden Dirty, and kind of wonder, does Woolen have a future here regardless of how he plays the rest of the year? And so, again, we're at the point of this franchise where we're trying to establish who are the guys. I think Jobe's the guy they're very high on, and I think he does have more of a future in Seattle, despite Woolen being a way more talented player. And I think you and Griff have made a pretty good case of, look, I've been very down on Woolen. Just I look at the guys that Macdonald, and who knows how long this guy's going to be here. It's all high IQ. When I played sports, the thing that killed me was just the low awareness players, even the talented guys. And I don't know if you could teach that. So if you have Woolen have a great game against DK, that would be awesome for everyone. But I think for like the long-term prospects of this team, I think Jobe is probably higher in the coaches and books than Woolen. I don't think they feel comfortable paying him, and I think they might trade him, like you talked about, if Witherspoon, some guys get back. So maybe you can make the case that if he has a great game, his trade value goes up. Maybe that's something. I'm going to say Jobe.
Yeah. Let's actually talk about, I don't know if I've said as much about the trade thing on here. I tweeted a little bit about some trade targets, but we'll maybe do a couple more. You can only have ones in a second. But what occurred to me this week, Jeff, and I think I texted you and some of the guys about it, was for them to turn, I talked about this with Mike Sando yesterday, for them to turn back on Riq Woolen as a starter after one game this season, and for the coaching staff, both Mike Macdonald and Aden Dirty, to be pretty matter of fact about, like, he didn't do his job. They weren't like super harsh about it, but they could have been a lot more graceful in how they like allowed him, some room. But they didn't. They basically were like, this guy didn't do what he needs to do. It makes me think that they're not attached to this player. Plus, we've heard from Brady Henderson before. His understanding is he doesn't think they're going to re-sign this guy. So if all that's true, then you're probably going to have a guy in the locker room that is not super happy to be there at a certain point. You're going to have some tensions. How likely is it that are they going to be comfortable getting a third round comp pick for this guy in 2027 by letting him walk in free agency? Or are they going to try to flip him, Riq Woolen, Jeff, for value now to potentially address some other holes on the roster?
Yeah, like when Brady came on your show, I don't know if it was June or July, and you were going through the 2022 draft class, and he had as a 1 out of 10 in June or July to re-sign these guys. I remember I texted you right away being like, whoa, that shocked me. And obviously the way I talked about how Macdonald, what he values and some of Woolen's limitations, it always seemed like a weird match. Woolen's a perfect Pete Carroll player. And so again, like you said, was striking to me in terms of like, we're so used to Pete around here, who may be the best at handling a loss or handling adversity or how he kind of helps people maximize performance. Pete is brilliant at that. I'll criticize Pete for certain things, but that is something he is one of one. And we're so used to how he would have done that. And hearing Macdonald, and they came out and they did not hide their feelings. It didn't seem like very well. And it seemed like they were still pretty irked, like a lot of fans were. And so you hear those Brady comments, you hear these comments, and it's hard not to tie it together and see, okay, Brady heard that from somewhere. And Brady reports stuff. You always take later note of that. So again, I think about that Rams game last year, and when he's just sitting back there and he makes the same mistake. And again, Woolen does so many good things. Like he breaks up that pass in the end zone last week that could have been a touchdown. That's a game-saving play potentially. And he does so many good things, but it's the moment of truth stuff where he just freezes. And it just seems like it's not effort related. It's just IQ moments, which is like Julian Love, the first guy they extended, is the opposite. That guy is so high IQ. He's developing. He's fit so well into this defense. And so I was left wondering the same thing as you. Like at some point, if you're not going to sign the guy, assuming you have the bodies to get through the season, at best, you're hoping for a third-round comp in 2027, which if the Seahawks sign people, which they're going to have some roster holes, they might even cancel that out. They have cap room. I would really think you kind of look at trading him, and the Raiders might be a pretty good match with the dude who drafted him, the dude who got the most out of him, where they don't have great corners out there in Las Vegas. But yeah, I'm kind of wondering. Like I know Evan, for example, on our show, when he heard Brady Henderson, he's like, we should trade this guy now. If we're not going to sign him, what's the point? You already ultimately potentially cost them a game because they didn't do that trade. So I think most corners in that spot make that play. So yeah, I was certainly left wondering, especially hearing the coaches, if he's even going to last the season here.
So I'm definitely I think the first place where this has started. I'm not reporting this. I don't have any inside information. I'm just putting two and two together. I'm reading between the lines. And this felt to me a little bit like the Tyrell Dodson, Jerome Baker thing, where you could just kind of see that there wasn't the attachment in the organization to these guys, that they'd only signed to 1-year deals, and they both ended up being flipped out of here. And I then look, Jeff, and my first thing I do when I think, okay, so yeah, they have a valuable trade chip now, and you could potentially throw Kenneth Walker into that, but I'm not going to go there yet. And who would want him? Pete Carroll seems like the obvious. And you're like, okay, what does Los Angeles or Las Vegas, excuse me, have anything that would be of value? Well, Jacoby Myers, their wide receiver, already asked to be traded, and they've kept him. He's in the last year of his deal. He's played slot, but he also plays outside. He has played outside receiver. A trade of a malcontent wide receiver who's on the last year of his deal for a corner seems to check off a lot of boxes in my head. They've got Michael Mayer, the tight end, who also there's a little question about redundancy there, but my understanding is they're pretty much comfortable with keeping him.
Yeah.
And the other place, Jeff, that comes to mind is Clint Kubiak's, New Orleans Saints from last year.
Yeah.
Rashid Shaheed's in the last year of his deal. And you could not pick a better fit for what the Seahawks need to complement JSN than Shaheed. If you ended up with Shaheed, or I think it's much less likely Chris Olave, who is JSN's receiver partner at Ohio State. The reason I think it's less likely is because they picked up the 5th-year option. Usually that's not going to be a guy they trade, but let's say it's Shaheed, Tory, Horton, and JSN for your go-forward receiver room. That's a much more viable group for the next few years.
Yeah, that changes a lot of what it might be the biggest weakness on their entire roster right now is where's the speed of receiver. That Kubiak and these guys have already coached him. They know his Shaheed inside out. When they unlocked that offense at the beginning of the year, Shaheed was playing out of his mind. And before the injuries to Shaheed and the rest of the guys tore down that offense. And Shaheed gives the Seahawks the one thing they really just don't have is the explosive speed. And he's one of the more explosive receivers, and just in terms of pure talent. He's not the best route runner like a lot of other guys. Myers is an amazing route runner. He would be the perfect fit, especially if the Saints are in this constant cap trouble situation, and Olave is being, but they're going to be constantly. I don't know if they're going to want to pay Shaheed, and so I think they're already like $40 million over the cap next year. That would be a very logical situation. And Olave, when you first said it, I'm like, oh my God, that would be the perfect guy to do. But then you look, they have a first-year head coach who's an offensive guy. They don't have a lot of building blocks there. I don't see why they would want to. They're probably going to draft pretty high and pick a quarterback. I don't know if Olave is a guy that they're going to trade. I think he'd be pretty much off limits unless you overpay for him. So, but Shaheed, with that contract situation, and if they're high on Woolen, I don't know obviously how they view him. That would be I think that would even be better than Jacoby Myers.
Yeah, it's an interesting one for sure. We're going to do some more, a couple more. You can only have ones. We'll talk a few more minutes with our good pal, Jeff Simmons. Before we do that, let's talk about the Sleeper app, man. This is a sponsor of the show and a great place for you to go check on all your fantasy football matchups, chat with friends, hang out with people, get updates on sports, all sorts of things, real-time updates, visualization on stats. And if you use promo code Hawks, you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 25 states. Check out that Sleeper app today. Jeff, check it out, dude. All right, so you can only have one. The right side of the line, Abe Lucas and Anthony Bradford play well. The left side of the line, Charles Cross and Grey Zabel play well. And the implication here is that means the other side does not play well. So you can only have one.
Ooh. I'm going to go the left side of the line. Again, I think for the Seahawks prospects to go really, really well at some point, dudes need to emerge. I'm more concerned about that than covering up weaknesses. And obviously Anthony Bradford being the fourth guy on that line would be huge. But I think if Zabel and Cross become like, you saw one of the best pass protecting games from Cross's whole career. Obviously not the best edge rusher he went up against, but Zabel, I know a lot of the people who watched him, like the Nate Tices and Jeremiah's, they were much higher on him than PFF graded him. And he was 61-ish. They both came out pretty impressed. So again, for the Seahawks to become relevant, they need more guys to emerge from pretty good players to strength. And I think Cross and Zabel are one of the best things going about this Seahawks team right now. If those two can become a really strong part of your team, I think that's more important than masking kind of weaknesses, what a lot of people think Anthony Bradford is. And again, you can make the case that maybe having a balanced line is the best thing, where you don't have a weakness and the whole line's playing really well. Pretty good case for that, especially if they're going up against TJ Watt. If that side dominates, it's great. But again, I'm still looking at, I liked Zabel, what I saw from him as the first game of his career. Really liked Cross when I rewatched. I didn't notice it on the first watch at all. So I'd be really jacked if the left side can come out and have a really good game again in Pittsburgh against that team.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a player that had a better first week that got less attention than Charles Cross. Yeah. I mean, if you watch his reps against Nick Bosa, he completely shut him down. I mean, that was really, really impressive high-level stuff from Charles Cross. And I will give PFF some credit in that case. I didn't see it until I looked at their grades, and then I went back and watched, and I was like, yeah, I think those are legit. So I'll say this, like either one, you know, I think there's a good case to be made. For me, if the right side can play well, have a good game against TJ Watt and that group, and if you can run to the right with one of the best, if not the best edge run defender out there, then bring it on. Like that would be really, really encouraging. So I also am a little bit concerned, Jeff, about false starts on the road. And so, you know, if Anthony Bradford can avoid some holds and some false starts, that would be good as well. So yeah, I think I go right side. All right. Last one. You can only have one. Mike Macdonald has a good game calling the defense. or Clint Kubiak has a good game calling the offense?
Clint Kubiak by far. Again, I think I've seen enough from Macdonald to know what he can do. And if Aaron Rodgers beats him, it'd hurt because it's the strength of this team. It's how they have to win. But look, I think we've seen so much from Macdonald. We saw how they attacked Shanahan, how different that was, how guys used to be running wide open every time Pete Carroll played them by the end with essentially the same players. The biggest question with Macdonald, and even if you take this further with defensive coaches in general, is they don't have the offensive side figured out. And we've seen over time with the numbers and the data, offense is more sustainable. So I think there's still a question lingering with Macdonald is how does he handle the locker room, the EQ stuff, all that kind of stuff, which left us with some questions this week. But two is if Macdonald can't get the offense right for the second year in a row and he hired a guy who's not good enough or the offense isn't figured out and do they have to hire someone else next year? That just leaves so many questions in the building. And it's why everyone got excited about the idea of them hiring an offensive coach. And again, that doesn't mean they get everything right. Ben Johnson's going through quite a bit of struggles in his first week as head coach. But I think if this Macdonald thing's going to work, they need to have competent offense. And if they are left perplexing coaching, because I don't think Kubiak, I don't know what happened last week. If they just ran their offense and they got beat, I'd feel maybe the personnel's the issue. Maybe they're just a receiver away. He just looked like shell-shocked. I don't even know I still can't describe what happened there. So I think for the long-term prospects of this team, they need to be able, and for Macdonald to work as head coach in general, they need to be able to figure out offense. They can't be. I heard Bill Simmons going on the show and be like, I want to pick Seattle this week, but he was so shook by that 4th and 1 play. He's like, I don't trust Macdonald. See that defensive guy who plays scared? And I'm like, I don't know. He went for a 4th and 3 on the second drive. That they got that kind of cheap flag on. But those questions are lingering right now. And if Kubiak goes into a shell again, I'm not going to feel very good about how good this team can be, regardless of if the defense dominates.
Yeah, it's interesting because the way I look at it, Jeff, I think Macdonald, the Seahawks defense has a better matchup against the Steelers offense than the Seahawks offense does. I mean, it's hard to go in to Pittsburgh. I don't care what they did against the Jets last week. You're going to go in Pittsburgh. You're going to have Cam Hayward, Jalen Ramsey, TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Nick Herbig's going to be back.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of dudes. I mean, Patrick Queen's, can be a playmaker. They've got guys. And so, if the Seahawks offense struggles in that game, everyone's going to lose their minds, and I get it. But I'm kind of expecting that that's a real possibility. I don't think that this is the game where you'd say, okay, new offense, new scheme, all this stuff. Of course, they got a layup here in Pittsburgh against all those. No, they don't. So it is a tough matchup, and there's a reason the Seahawks aren't favored. And I think the offense versus defense for the Steelers in this case is a big reason why. If the Seahawks defense struggles against this offense, I'm going to have some concerns, dude, because I think this offense is a lot more limited than what they showed in week 1 against the Jets. I think the Seahawks defensive line has a very good matchup in this game. And if they're not able to disrupt the least mobile quarterback in the NFL behind a offensive line that gave up quite a bit of pressure, I'm not going to be happy, man. But I hear you. I think
that's why I picked mine, because the improbability of it, if I can pick one thing, if the Seahawks offense, I think they're the 3rd lowest projected team of the week, other than the Russell Wilson Giants. And if anyone watched that team play last week without their left tackle, I've been a guy who's not the biggest Russ guy in the world, but it was kind of sad watching what's kind of going on right now. But anyway, it's them and Spencer Rattler with New Orleans. I think there's no other team projected to score lower points. And so if Kubiak came out and they proved that wrong, that would really excite me, because you're right, the odds of it happening I don't think are very high. And so if I could pick one thing, it'd be that to be completely wrong. But you're dead on, because look, for the Seahawks to work this year and in general, they need to be great on defense. And if they struggle against a team that's not that good offensively, I know he threw 4 touchdowns last week, but a lot of it was just Arthur Smith scheme stuff, and it wasn't great throws, and it wasn't guys emerging you didn't think so. They're a well-coached team. They're kind of a boring team. I think with Aaron Rodgers, he can't really move anymore. He still can get that flick and get the ball down the field. I get it, but if we can have such an improbable result that proves the bettors wrong, that proves the odds makers wrong, and they can just rebound from what was a very discouraging game plan last week, I think that would excite me more.
Yeah. Yeah. And Jeff, I mean, not to be a downer, but I'm going to be like, I'm looking at FTN fantasies and their odds here. They've got the Steelers with a 57% chance to win. And I think that's about right. Like, I think I told you last night, I was like, I give the Seahawks about a 40% chance to win. And I think you feel like it's a little bit closer to 50-50. Yeah.
I think it's a 50-50 game because of the matchup advantages. So in a 50-50 game, I would lean towards the home team, given the talent they have on defense and the matchup. But I think we've allocated the Steelers aren't a great offense, which plays well into the Seahawks. And the Seahawks' ability to pressure takes away their biggest strength on offense. They're not a great running team. They have Jalen Warren, and we all remember that Pittsburgh game a couple of years ago in Seattle where they just ran all over them. I don't think that's going to happen at all. And Macdonald knows Pittsburgh really well. So I think matchup-wise, pretty close. I just lean towards the home team in this scenario, and Pittsburgh's a good team at home. So, yeah, 57-43 FTN. I think because of the Seahawks' questions on offense, again, offense is the most sustainable predictor of success. That's why you see that kind of, and I feel like you probably feel that it's going to be too hard for the offense. So it's going to be a really hard game to overcome that.
Yeah, this isn't one of those games where it's like, man, I'm going into it just hoping it's close, or I don't think there's any chance. Like, I absolutely see paths for the Seahawks winning. It won't shock me if the Seahawks win. It won't shock me if the Seahawks play really well in this game. But if they don't, if they do what I think the expectation is that they come out of this game and they're 0-2, where are you going to be on this team? I'm going to get you your pre-emotional reaction to that.
Again, it depends on the context. If they play well and just lose a close game because of a couple of mistakes, or it's kind of similar to last week, I won't feel that differently than I feel right now. I feel frustrated that they wasted an opportunity, but they've been underdogs in both games. So I don't really know why 0-2 would be that different when this was a game that me and you picked them to lose before the season. Mm-hmm. And we thought week one was a kind of 50-50 game that they were 1.5 point underdogs. So I think people's emotions are going to turn on Schneider if things look really bad, especially if DK goes off on the other side and they're left limited on receiver, or if Geno Smith has another big game. It's going to be on national TV this week. I think emotions might get pretty high, but I always thought 0-2 was a pretty big possibility when I saw the schedule at the beginning of the year. I thought at best they were going to split. So I wouldn't feel that if they come out and just stink on both sides of the ball, or they do something really cowardly. I'm going to be worried about Kubiak and whether Macdonald knows enough about offense, because I've been a little uneasy with Macdonald of how he's just come out after games last year and games this year and be like, the offense didn't do anything. Like, aren't you on the headsets? Like, can't you put a stop to this? Like, even 2nd and 4 at the end of the game where they get set, like, that's a great place to run play action. Like, why can't you just say, run a freaking play action pass here? You're the head coach. So I'm going to be left with questions, but I'm not going to be like 0-2. I thought that was a legitimate possibility this year when I saw the schedule. If they come out and stink against New Orleans or stink against Arizona, that to me is the panic moments.
Yeah.
But this game was the game I always like. This is a game I always could think they just come out and put up a complete stinker. And I thought that was a possibility. It wouldn't bother me that much. I know Evan asked us the question yesterday, like, would you start to panic? And my answer was that'd be stupid. But I stand by that.
Yeah, it's a tough week 2 matchup for a lot of reasons, and 0-2 would be a tough pill to swallow for sure. I'd be most concerned about the locker room, to be honest. Like, it would test the connection that they've worked so hard to build up and the trust that they've tried to build up across players and coaches. Because the thing that gets buy-in the most, Jeff, is winning, right? And results. And so
I just think 0-2 is too early for that.
I would say this: if they hadn't like already started to fire shots across the bow of players who had bad games, like Woolen and Knight, I might feel a little different. Like, but that already puts some strain between coaches and players, potentially. Maybe the players, like I said, maybe the players are embracing that. They're like, thank God they're holding him accountable.
I do wonder, though, because you go look at Ernest Jones' face when Riq Woolen gives up the ball. I wonder if they might like it.
Maybe.
Look at like some of the reactions. I know Josh Cashman caught a couple of reactions of players just glaring at Woolen when that happens. Or last year at the sideline where Julian Love is screaming at Woolen when he gave up that 3rd and 19 against the Jets. I wonder if they might like it.
I think that is a total possibility. Yeah. And I don't know the answer. So that's like the football part of it. I'm not I wouldn't be as worried about the loss this weekend in isolation. Obviously 0-2 is not great. And everyone's gonna be talking about that you don't make the playoffs and that all these odds and what it's gonna say. Everyone's gonna come out with their Geno Smith priors and their DK Metcalf priors and their anti-Macdonald, like all that stuff will happen. Fine. This is not the game to me that's going to really be a great evaluation tool unless they win. And I know that seems like an odd take, but if they lose, that's kind of what I'm expecting going in. If they go into Pittsburgh and they win this game in any fashion, that will be as impressive as the week 1 loss was disappointing. Like, to me, it would almost cancel out. It doesn't matter in terms of playoff seedings and all that because it's AFC non-divisional. But I think this is this is an equally challenging matchup to go into Pittsburgh as it was to face San Francisco at home in the first game.
I think it's a much more challenging matchup. I think week 1 was a game I expected them to win that game. And even though it took a blocked field goal and a missed field goal to probably put themselves in position, I think just with like a normal offensive game plan, they might have won comfortably. And so I think obviously the road challenge, and I did say this was a 50-50 game. They are underdogs, but I picked them to lose at the beginning of the year for the same reason. I think this is just a really hard game. And like you remember the 2011 season, they go in there after a decent first game against San Francisco and they get shut out. And so that left a lot of people questions about Pete at the time. And it took halfway through the year until things started changing for him. So I don't know if this is history repeating itself. It was San Francisco and then at Pittsburgh, if you remember, in 2011. It's kind of crazy. 15 years later. But yeah, I'm very curious. And I think they're dead on. I think if they prove you wrong, I think that's as big as last week was in terms of how, in my opinion, they blew that week 1 game.
Agreed, Jeff. Agreed. So, you are right. It was 2011. It was at San Francisco, but they did lose that game.
They're at San Francisco, at Pittsburgh.
Holy, at San Francisco and at Pittsburgh. They lost 33-17 at San Francisco, then 24-0 to the Steelers. They did go on to, at the end of the season, turn that around a little bit. That's when Marshawn figured out how to run.
They beat Baltimore, who should have won the Super Bowl that year.
They did. All right, Jeff. Well, let's hope things go well. I'm about to head out, jump on a plane. I'll fly out there. I'll keep everybody in the loop. Maybe I'll share some pictures of Pittsburgh food. I've got some good recs that people have made. And then I'll be in the press box tomorrow to watch the game. And I'll tell you what, man, if they play well and they're like hitting Aaron Rodgers and they're running the ball and they're making big plays, this could be the toughest situation for me to keep my cool in the press box so far. Winning in San Francisco last year was tough that way. But this would be a fun one potentially to see all of that unfold.
Yeah, if we hear stories of someone getting kicked out of the press box from the Seahawks side because they played too well, I think I know who that's going to be. So
you will. Let's hope that doesn't happen.
I think you're pretty good.
All right, guys. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks to Jeff Simmons, and keep in touch with us on all platforms at Hawk Blogger. Until next time, have a great rest of your Saturday.